everybody, and welcome to this session on sustainable CT and municipal certification. We are really thrilled by the response we've gotten from the municipal community around efforts to end homelessness. We know that we're all in this together and are just thrilled to have all of you here, so thank you for making the time. My name is Madeline Ravich, and I'm here from the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. Pleased to welcome all of you to our Housing Equals Justice conference. This is our 18th annual Training Institute and Conference. Normally we gather together in Hartford in May, but here we are, actually 1,000 people from across the state and across the country here, and we were thrilled to see 50 different municipalities represented in our registration. So thank you so much to everybody for joining us today. A little bit back a little bit about Housing Equals Justice. This is our conference focused on criminal justice, racial justice, and economic justice. Three themes that seem to run through all the work we're doing that we really wanted to showcase and focus on in our conference. We also are doing a deep dive into COVID and all of the different issues that it's brought up in work to address homelessness. So I hope that you're all joining different sessions and enjoying the conference and spread the word. And on that note, please do spread the word. Our hashtag is ATI 2020, and we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So help us tell the world that housing equals justice. And so, of course, we want to thank our sponsors, Bank of America and Zillow, who are making it possible for us to offer this conference free of charge. I'm so grateful to both Bank of America and Zillow for making all of that possible. And today I'm really pleased to actually introduce Jen Paradis, who's going to introduce our speakers. Actually, I'll say just a few words about who our speakers are, and then I think Jen is going to welcome all of you. Jen is one of our board members and has really played a big role in shaping our initiative to engage with municipalities. So quickly, our presenters today are going to be Brian O'Connor from Connecticut Conference on Municipalities, me, Alyssa Norwood, and Lisa Noriega, both of whom are from Sustainable CT. So thank you, Brian, Alyssa, and Lisa for joining us today. And Jen, would love for you to say a couple of words if you don't mind.
Yes, hello everybody. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be able to celebrate and come together and to talk about this important work. As Madeline shared, the goals of the ATI this year are really to talk about how intersectional the work to end homelessness is. And when we talk about economic justice and racial justice and criminal justice and our intersections with the criminal justice system, we know that we knew it before and we know it even more so now that we cannot do this work alone and in silos as nonprofit leaders, as providers, that we must come together and be an active member, sometimes a leader, sometimes a follower, but a contributor to the our community efforts, our municipal efforts to end homelessness. And that's why the CCM campaign and the task force to end homelessness has really come together at quite an amazing time. The goals of this initiative, and we're going to do a deep dive on all of this today, so I really won't spend too much time other than to say it really is about, the kind of old adage of, no one can do everything, but together we can all do something. And so really coming together as municipalities in a strength-based approach, in a community strength-based approach to address homelessness, using the natural resources and understanding the unique needs each community has and the barriers that they face. So it's a wonderful discussion here today about how to activate your communities using your strengths and recognizing the resources that are embedded within your community, and hopefully getting some examples of how we've been able to bring this work along across the state. Again, we can all, we can't do everything, but we can all do something, and so that's our work today. So Madeline did a great job introducing our speakers. Our goals here today, as you see them, are really brief overviews and introductions. These are wonderful partners at the table. Really talking about an action development process. So we're going to get an opportunity to talk about the menu of options that we've laid out as a part of our campaign to end homelessness across the 169 municipalities in the state, and really get a chance to contribute. You'll get a chance as a attendee and as a listener to contribute to adding to this menu of options that cities and towns can participate in when it comes to their local work to end homelessness, and of course talking about the work ahead. This is a project in formation, and so the work that we're going to be talking about today is going to be informed and impacted by your participation and your engagement. So we're just so thrilled to have you. I appreciate the time, and with that, I'm going to move on to Mr. O'Connor. Brian.
Thank you, Jennifer. And first of all, thank you to CCEH and Sustainable CT for inviting CCM to participate in today's program. We're also pleased that it's also part of our educational and training program. So I know many of you may be on here to get credits and learn something new about homelessness and how we're going to tackle the problem. I think one of the key things that CCM is most proud of is that we've been reaching out to different partners throughout the years. Sustainable CT, I think we launched 2 years ago a partnership that was focused around and centered around conservation and best practices within municipal government. And I think it was a year ago this month where we partnered with CCEH and formed our task force on homelessness. And I think the synergy that brought us together with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's fortuitous that we already had much of this in place, and we're pleased that we're able to kind of expand upon it, because there's a tremendous opportunity to leverage each of our resources in order to again come up with best practices, protocols for handling the homelessness population, and hopefully put in preventative measures beforehand, so we can save resources and expend them where they are best used. And I think giving someone a home is probably the fundamental part of security, and that's one of the things that we're reaching out to our first selectmen and mayors in having this kind of outreach. And I think that leads to another point. Besides this program today, on this Thursday at same time, 2 to 3, we're going to have our Mayor's Task Force on Homelessness talk about what's working and some of the best practices that we've already started seeing the results of. So again, CCM is a proud partner with CCEH and Sustainable CT, and we look forward to working together over the next few years and hopefully stem the tide of homelessness in Connecticut. And at this point in time, I'll turn it back over to Madeline.
Oh, thank you. You can put that slide back up once more. I like that slide. Oh, so just a few words about CCEH. We were founded in 1982 in response to the closure of institutions across the country, because there was a real need for coordinated efforts to end homelessness, and that's why we're so happy to have all of you here today. We have over 100 members, including emergency shelter providers, transitional housing providers, community and business leaders, and strategic partners, including the kinds of organizations you see represented here at the table. And our effort here together is to prevent and end homelessness in Connecticut. And when we talk about that, we're talking about making homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring. So I am going to share my screen really quickly just to give you a little bit of a glimpse of what we have been focused on together through our work with the Connecticut Conference of Municipality and Sustainable CT, which has been an incredible partner. You see here a couple of different examples of responses to homelessness when it comes to encampments from a while back. And so the question of encampments is one of many issues that we know that towns and cities are looking for guidance on. And this is one of the reasons that we decided to start our municipal working group some time ago, long before COVID started, because we knew that there were issues like encampments where towns and cities were looking for guidance. And so we knew that it wasn't just street homelessness that people were asking questions about, but also family homelessness and youth homelessness. So we said we really need to work together and figure out what kinds of partnerships we can form to address these issues. what we do as an organization, we provide training and technical assistance, data and analysis advocacy. We provide support to regions and some emergency assistance. And together, through this coalition and this collaboration between so many different agencies, we really, as a state, led the country in many ways in reducing homelessness really significantly. And the way we've been able to do that is through creating a coordinated system where people can call 211. If they aren't able to get the help they need through 211, they're referred to a meeting with somebody from their regional coordinated access network. And if they can't be diverted from shelter in that appointment, they end up in shelter. But we work very quickly to try to make that time in shelter very short by managing by name lists and figuring out how to get people housed as quickly as possible. And so every one of your towns is part, and hopefully you know this already, but just in case, every one of your towns is part of one of 7 coordinated access networks. And so those regional coordinated access networks are working together all the time to figure out who in your region is experiencing homelessness and figure out ways to address those issues. One of the things we've done together through our work with Connecticut Conference on Municipalities and Sustainable CT and the Mayor's Task Force, which is going to be meeting together on Thursday, is put together sample resolution language that you can use, that your towns can use to pass a resolution committing to ending homelessness. And we urge all of you to do that. But we also are here today, and this is the meat of what we're talking about, to talk about the idea of creating certification actions, and are thrilled because Sustainable CT took a sort of loose vision that we had with CCM and turned it into something that we're going to really talk about today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alyssa and Lisa.
Thank you so much, Madeline. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. So for those who aren't already familiar, Sustainable CT is a program managed and coordinated by Eastern Connecticut State University. It's a voluntary municipal certification program, and it provides a flexible menu of coordinated actions and resources to promote sustainability at the local and the regional level, all with the goal of promoting greater livability. And in reflecting on the journey of the past several months, the connections between the work of CCM, CCEH, and our organization, a question that we often get is, what is a category with respect to homelessness prevention doing in a sustainability program? And for those who aren't familiar, my faith is that of Judaism, and we're in the midst right now of a festival called Sukkot. And Sukkot is the Hebrew word for booths, and there's a practice of building a temporary structure on one's property during the 7-day festival of Sukkot. It recounts the wandering of the Jews in the desert, and I thought how appropriate it is that during the time of the Annual Training Institute, that there's this coincidence, this coinciding of this festival about transience and impermanence. And it's during the time that I was contemplating and preparing for this lecture that I really started thinking about homelessness, which, in the sense that I go out into this hut and dwell in it for this period of time, that's the choice. And when we think about vulnerability and our most vulnerable moments when life is difficult, I think that for not all, but for many of us, the phrase that might come to mind first is this notion of, I want to go home. And when we think about housing as a right, for those of you that were at the session on Monday, the keynote talking about housing as a fundamental right, we've made a decision as a society that all children of a certain age have a right to free and public education, and that all older adults in this country have the right to free health care. So housing as this right, and the main message of the housing first approach, shifting the conversation in the housing community to this notion of what can I do to help you, to what can we do to get you housed. Everything about creating a sustainable community flows from this fundamental premise that everyone needs a home, and and that housing is fundamental, which is why it's this integral part of sustainability and why we're so excited going forward to integrate our work into our program. So with that, I'd also like to introduce my colleague from Sustainable CT, Alyssa Noriega, who's going to speak very briefly about her role and the intersections between sustainability and equity in our program.
So hi everyone, I'm Lisa and I'm an intern with Sustainable CT, primarily supporting action development this summer and fall. And in my time with the program, I've been particularly impressed with Sustainable CT's focus on equity and how equity is really at the core of our mission in all of our action categories, now including homelessness prevention. And I've recognized, and as you'll all see very shortly, that the heart of our goals are not only environment, but equally people-centered, embracing uniqueness, trailblazing for diversity, and creating opportunities for connectivity, which I feel very honored to share with you today.
Thanks, Lisa. So, you know, bringing this all together, in the end, our goal is to help develop and refine this menu of homelessness prevention actions. So this is a moment in time. We'll show you our timeline shortly of all of this work. But the challenge of the current world context, of course, is that the heart and soul of all of this work is that of collaboration and interaction. So this format obviously presents some opportunities, but also some unique challenges. So if you all look at that we're going to be using throughout the presentation. So we're going to be pivoting back and forth between PowerPoints and opportunities to hear from all of you, even in an environment where we can't be face to face. So Lisa, if you don't mind stopping your sharing, we're going to pivot over to the Jamboard just so that you all can become comfortable with using it. For those that haven't used it before, if you look after you click on the link, you should see something that looks just like what I have up on the screen. And on the far left, under the arrow, there is something that looks like a sticky note. So you'll go ahead, you'll click on it, and you'll type a message in here and then click save. So the question that I have for all of you as we begin becoming familiar with this tool is, what brings you to this session today? Why do you care about this topic? And we'll just take a moment for people to start populating their responses. And panelists, feel free to participate in this as well. So as you go ahead and click on the sticky note and type your comments in, they'll appear one by one. So at this moment in a real session, we'd want to get a sense of who's in the room. So some of you will start to see who's here. So we'll give this one more minute, and I encourage you to keep typing responses in. We'll revisit the Jamboard momentarily, but we're very interested again to know the composition of the group, who's here, and once you get inside, you'll see, please keep this window open because we'll be using it throughout. Fantastic, and you'll see our, we'll have things pile on, so. Fantastic, so I'm gonna stop sharing. Lisa, I'm gonna have you share again, and we'll proceed as people continue their work on the Jamboard. Fantastic. So the action development process. So Madeline already spoke about the action roadmap and all of the vast collaboration that's happened to bring it to fruition. So we just kind of wanted to contextualize today's session in the context of overall action development. So as you know, and as Brian from CCM mentioned, this Thursday, the CCM Homelessness Prevention Task Force will be meeting, but it was really more than a year ago that that task force first set the vision for creating a roadmap for municipalities to address homelessness. We had a working group with diverse representation meet in February, early this year, right before the pandemic came to visit Connecticut and all of the ramifications beyond. But since that time, Sustainable CT and the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness have continued its robust work on action draft development. We've worked to refine, we've continued to collect stakeholder feedback, and this is part of our piloting process where we really want to make sure that we stay true to our by towns for towns value in the program, and that the program that ultimately gets released into the community is one that's been shaped by all of you. So Lisa, if you could head to the next slide. So this represents incredible work by the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. This is the outreach that Madeline and her team did to bring diverse stakeholders together at our working group meeting. So in conceptualizing initially who would be at the table, and this group has continued to grow and flow and evolve since that initial time, we wanted to make sure there was representation across the top. Each of those letters represents one of the state's district reference groups. So folks may or may not be familiar with, they're one of many different ways to group similar towns. It's a model from the education system, but it helps provide a rough metric for similarly situated towns across the state. You'll see on the left various different municipal sectors that were contacted to make sure that we'd have representation from a broad swath of municipal representatives. And then with respect to the CANs, the coordinated access networks that Madeline mentioned, each color represents a different CAN. All right, great. So let's head to the next slide. So through that process and through other processes, which you can see outlined on the left, in addition to the working group, we had CCM send out a survey to all of its membership. We had direct conversations with CCEH through the CANs. And then with respect to Sustainable CT, we reached out to our towns and stakeholders, and all of that resulting in the culmination of 4 key areas that were identified for proposed action. So you can see them all here, and we're going to dig in a little bit more fully. Next slide. So at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Lisa. Lisa, if you could head to the next slide and set the context for us of why these 4 areas.
Yeah. So first and foremost, we would like to discuss our new homelessness prevention action roadmap as a response to the pervasive problem of homelessness in CT. And it's also in response to the fact that there are some really inspiring municipal and regional responses to address homelessness that can be replicated in other communities. So the tagline of Sustainable CT is local actions, statewide impact. And with that, our goal is to translate all of these towns, the collective local and regional actions they're taking, and have them become multiplied so in a broader sense we can really powerfully address homelessness as a state. And as many of you know, a part of the problem is a shortage of affordable housing, and municipalities are really encouraged to continue working to proactively assess community housing needs locally and regionally to determine that housing in areas of opportunity is available for all. But a really robust and collective process that Alyssa just laid out of stakeholder engagement has pointed to a greater need for simultaneously addressing each of these 4 areas that you see here, and we will discuss each of these in turn.
Thank you so much, Lisa. So area number 1, increasing public awareness and support. So many of you know better than anyone that there are still strong misperceptions about homelessness in Connecticut, and that persons experiencing homelessness have a certain stereotype and myths associated with them. And yet, as you've heard in other sessions in this conference, and you will throughout the remainder of the ATI, that the profile of persons experiencing homelessness can range from college students who were displaced by COVID very unexpectedly this past spring without a safe home to return to families with young children who might experience an unexpected financial crisis and then find themselves unable to pay rent. So the population of persons experiencing homelessness is diverse, and I think we all have this deep sense of shared humanity that we need to cultivate, not just as good human beings, but also as a result of this notion that any one of us at any given moment has the capacity to experience homelessness. None of us are immune. And as a result, it's our collective responsibility as a state to do the work together of ensuring that we successfully address homelessness. Nonetheless, there are pervasive myths and misperceptions about homelessness, that it's a choice, that homelessness, people experiencing homelessness might suffer addiction, that they're lazy, and so on. So the only way to debunk, disrupt, and change these further misperceptions is to support a robust network around education, increasing public awareness, and also emphasizing this idea that was again mentioned in the keynote earlier, that housing is a right. As a response to some community misperceptions about homelessness, towns in the state have done great work, and I'd encourage you all this Friday to attend the town hall virtual meeting that Hampden will be holding. It's potentially a model for other communities to bring people together in conversation and have a healthy dialogue stemming from what might otherwise be misperceptions. I also want to name that the New Britain Housing Authority is a potential model for the state, and that it prioritizes those who experience chronic homelessness. So with that context, Lisa, if you could head to the next slide. And I apologize, I had a disruption in the quality of my internet connection, but hopefully you can all hear me now. So these are 4 basic broad areas for municipal action with respect to increasing awareness and support. So we already talked about Hampden as a potential model. There are others as well to build awareness in your community and conduct extensive public education around homelessness. Funding is also critical, and there are many opportunities at both the local and the regional level to coordinate funding to help support homelessness. There's support that municipalities can provide, and we already spoke about the New Britain example with respect to public housing. So this is going to be our format. After each one of these areas, we're going to pivot over to the Jamboard. You should all have it open already. I'm going to share it up on my screen, and many different people participate in learning in many different ways. Again, we're a little constrained by our format in an attempt to have an interactive dialogue. But here are my questions, and then I'll give you the opportunity to respond to them. So with respect to increasing public awareness, support for efforts to end homelessness, you all are on the ground. You know better than anyone. What's your feedback on this action for municipalities? How feasible is it? And what potential obstacles do you see? So I'm going to ask you all, as you think about that, to honor the way you best share information. So for all of the introverts who are on, if you could go ahead, as we mentioned and tried previously, click on that leftmost sticky pad. And for those that are following along, we're on the 3rd slide in the Jamboard. So if you click on the sticky pad, you can start posting notes. For those of you, we'd love to hear your voices. There's a button at the bottom that allows you to raise your hand, and the administrative folks who are running the ATI can unmute you if you raise your hand. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback on this action, its feasibility, and obstacles. So give you all a moment to digest and synthesize, and looking forward to some conversation such that we can have it in this format. So I see somebody's making it a little bigger. I'm not disagreeing. I know the font is hard to read, but I'm going to make it smaller. If you could maybe increase the size of your screen, and we'll leave room on the white space for people to put their sticky notes. And while people are working on this, I am going to head back to the first slide just so that people can synthesize. So some thoughts and comments here. I'll call out some themes. And again, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So we encourage folks to raise their hand, unmute. If you're someone who wrote something here and you'd like to expound upon it, we recognize and celebrate that. So, you know, somebody echoes here what we just spoke about, how public perception is a barrier. A lot of interest in this topic. That's great to see. A lot of you, I see the words case manager here, people talking about better serving their towns, homeless population. So a lot of people on the ground. You all are the eyes and ears for these larger state level programs. So delighted that you're here today and excited for your partnership as we work through. So, all right, so moving on to the third board. So somebody talked about obstacles. One is with respect to domestic violence and its effect on eviction and the ability to obtain stable housing. If you're comfortable, will the person who wrote that be willing to raise your hand at the bottom and you can be unmuted? We'd love to hear more. And then we also see, I'll read these as they come up. I know some people have access and some not. We also have a comment that some folks believe there's a greater awareness that homelessness is an issue for small towns as well as large cities. So that's a great and important point. So thank you to whoever wrote it. This is a statewide issue. And when we talk about education and misperceptions, among them are this notion that this is a problem unique to cities. As you'll hear in future conversations that we'll hold on this topic, as well as in other sessions during the ATI this week, this is an issue that affects 169 towns. And we'll talk about that a little more on the next action with respect to data, because there's a lot of homelessness that's not captured in the reporting that we have. I'll just read one or two more, and this is going to be a combination of people continuing to work on this as well as dialogue. And again, I encourage folks to raise their hand. So somebody just wrote, I understand that the new system of people needing to go into a shelter is supposed to be better, but I feel in the past that when I would assist a client to call a shelter looking for a bed, I had a better outcome. So this whole idea that as systems change and evolve, that there's some challenge, and that in the effort to make improvements, that sometimes we take steps backward before we take forward. So I'm going to let folks continue to work here. In parallel, I'm going to move on to our next slide on the Jamboard, which is slide 4. This is the same set of actions. So with respect to increasing public awareness and support for efforts to end homelessness. So the question I have for you here, and again, keeping in mind, this is about empowering municipalities to do better and more in these areas across the state. What are some success stories and what are some resources to support? So some that I had already mentioned, and I'll also add some up here as well. So we had talked about the New Britain Public Housing Authority. You could see one of our bullets here is around designating public housing and working with the local public housing authority to prioritize for referrals from the CAN. So a shout out to New Britain and other communities, Hamden, again, that's working to build public awareness. So what have you done if you're in municipal government or a resident of a town and just simply aware of great things happening in towns across the Connecticut that might inspire some other action? And what are some resources that can potentially help towns here? So that might include the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness and all of their great work. It might include national resources. So we'd love to see what you're doing, and great job, Wyndham, which happens to be a sustainable CT certified community, on creating a website. You can all see there, wyndham.nofreeze.com. So thanks for your great work. We have another comment that just came up around encouraging recent signals from Wallingford, Norwich, and a number of other PHAs that they plan to apply for CARES Act HCV vouchers. That's wonderful that resources are going to be heading into those communities. Again, I remind anyone, if you're interested, to feel free to raise your hand, and we'd love for you to share thoughts verbally as well. with
Alyssa,
the
we
larger.
do have a raised hand in one of our attendees. So I do want to call note to that. If that person can.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for noting that. So Alan, if you can unmute that person so they could speak, that would be great.
Bear with us. We actually, because we're using Zoom webinar, we actually have to promote people to the stage to do it. So it takes a moment to do that.
Thank you for your patience, Madeline. We're all learning the technology together. And while that's happening, I'll note it says that some small cities have used CDBG. For folks who aren't familiar, that's Community Development Block Grant funds with respect to drop-in hospitality center in Waterbury. So that's wonderful. And just to remind folks, so this community development block grant funds can be used regionally. It's not just one town that can benefit from them. So communities working collaboratively at the regional level can leverage those funds to address homelessness regionally as well. Fantastic. So I wanna honor the time. So as the technology is unfolding, I think we will pivot back to the slides. So I'm going to stop my share, but as soon as, again, folks who raise their hand are appropriately promoted to panelists, we'll pause so that we can have some dialogue amidst the presentation. So I'm now going to turn it over to Lisa, who's going to talk about collecting and sharing data.
Great, thank you, Alyssa. All right, so a management consultant named Jeffrey Moore once said that without data, you are blind and deaf in the middle of a freeway. And this paints a pretty profound image of how important it is to meaningfully know the contours of the problem that we're trying to address. And the key here is that we know some things through data successes, especially through the shelter system, but the reality is that much of the data we have does not adequately capture sheltered encampments and unsheltered homelessness, which is very broad and includes situations like couch surfing in our communities, and we can't help those who can't be identified. So these are two areas where outreach data, or the data that we get from actually going out and talking to people, is really important statewide. And currently we only get outreach data once a year through the point in time counts. So that doesn't paint an accurate picture for towns who are determining their rates of homelessness. So for towns who say, hey, we're really small and rural and this isn't our issue, no town in the state can really say that because they simply don't have the adequate data points to really support that determination. And the truth is that homelessness is prevalent everywhere, just at varying degrees of visibility. And we would know more about the different ways in which homelessness prevails if we had more supported and connected data across the board. For example, this lack of data causes an anticipated fear for McKinney-Vento liaisons in the school system, especially in the COVID context, of being able to track down students generally, but particularly tracking down those without homes is the hardest. And an inspiring example of a success with this is the city of Hartford's hosted youth count sites. So you can read these for yourself, but at a high level, and we'll be able to spend more time with these in just a second through the Jamboard. We'd like to address the issues I just mentioned through our action by encouraging municipalities to mobilize volunteers for point in time and youth counts, regionally report and coordinate homelessness data, and to make sure that data is publicly accessible. So now we will transition to the interactive part, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks for bearing with an unstable internet connection on my end. Lisa, I dropped off and now I'm back. Are you ready for me to share the Jamboard?
Yes, ready.
So for folks who signed on late, if you look in your chat, you'll see we're using an interactive tool called Jamboard. This is our format. I know a lot of folks are on, but if you're not yet, you can go ahead and click on that link. We're on slide 5, though you're welcome to share your thoughts throughout. So this is the same set of questions that we asked previously. So with respect to collecting and sharing homelessness data, we want to hear from you. So again, what's your feedback on this action? How feasible is it for municipalities to conduct? And what are the obstacles? We're interested in hearing from you with respect to data. As folks are filling in, I am just gonna pop back to some of the previous ones. So to reiterate, the previous action was around increasing public awareness and supporting efforts to end homelessness. There was conversation around social media. So I just wanted to name and honor the many different ways that people receive information, and that particularly now, in a time where in-person connectivity is harder, that using electronic channels will be really important. With respect to an obstacle, I just want to read this one. Smaller towns within our CAN region do not feel it's their responsibility to support those experiencing homelessness in the larger community, and the larger communities are feeling overwhelmed. So this is an interesting dynamic that warrants further conversation. But I just want to name generally that we've reached a moment where we need to think collaboratively and creatively around how we address this fundamental right for all folks in Connecticut to have a home to go home to. So with that, I'm gonna move ahead again to the data one and thank folks who are posting. So there's one post that says, posting data for smaller towns, there may be some threshold below which there are too few cases in the data to share without risk of identifying, even if it's aggregate. That's a great one, and I thank you for naming it. For folks who don't know me, I have a public health background, and I'm similarly familiar with that challenge of communities that are reporting with respect to disease and chronic illness as well. So there's an opportunity to perhaps collaborate with folks in the health sector in terms of strategies, in terms of how we collect meaningful data and also honor privacy. So there's a question around how does a town access Connecticut's homelessness management information system? Madeline, I know I'm putting you on the spot, and hopefully you're available. I know you're juggling lots of other things associated with the ATI, but I wonder if you might be able to speak to that question.
No, that's such a great question, and I'm so glad that you asked. So I'm going to put my information in the chat so that people can follow up afterwards in case you have questions like this one. This is a great one. I think that the question of getting municipalities online in HMIS is one that has come up, and so I'd love to have a follow-up conversation with anybody who's interested in exploring that. I think that this question of data, that's exactly what we're talking about here, is figuring out how to make sure that people that we're able to integrate what you're seeing in your towns with what we're learning through the statewide HMIS system. And so I'll put my information in the chat. Thank you for asking that.
Thank you. We also have a raised hand, and I know that our administrator is in the process of trying to promote that person to a panelist. So great, Robin Geller, welcome to not just typing, but actually being able to speak. If you go ahead and unmute your microphone, and if you have the capacity to put yourself on camera, we'd love to see you. Welcome, what are your thoughts? While Robin's working through figuring out how to unmute, I just wanted to name a few other comments. So somebody mentioned the point in time count is so critical and should be more resourced with those with expertise in data collection and not dependent on volunteer efforts. So for those who aren't familiar, there's lots of different kinds of data that the state collects, but perhaps some of the most powerful and robust comes from outreach, where a number of dedicated volunteers on a very cold, usually very cold day, go out to do some real-time counting and perhaps get some of the best data that we have in the state with respect to homelessness. So I thank you for naming that more is needed to get better data, and that's a stepping stone.
And can I just interject?
Can
I just interject that that's really significant?
Madeline.
I think. Sorry. So we are really thinking about, that's exactly what we're talking about here, is trying to figure out how we can work with municipalities to collect year-round data in areas where maybe our data, we have some, but we could be stronger. We know that the kind of coordination we've managed to accomplish so far has been what's driven the downward trend in homelessness across the state, but COVID has upped the ante and made it that much more challenging. And I think it's made it so important for us all to be figuring out how municipalities and the CANs can work together. So great question. And, you know, the pit is once a year, but we want to be year round. Absolutely.
That's great. So I'm going to let posts continue here. Again, please keep working on this one. I also want to make sure people know that in the question and answer box, if you click Q&A, there's a lot of great dialogue and information happening there as well. So make sure that you're tracking all of the threads of information and information sharing that's happening right now. I'm going to leave it to you to work on this one as Lisa and I present and move on with our actions, just to honor the time we have. But just as we did with the first one, if there are success stories or resources that you can post here. So what's happening in your town? Is there an initiative either at the local level or regionally beyond the point in time count where there's outreach happening, whether through your social services department, if you're lucky enough to have one, or in smaller communities, volunteers? But what sort of outreach are you doing to connect with people, whether it's somebody who's experiencing homelessness or has other comorbidities and challenges and is being served through your social services system and might not yet be experiencing homelessness, but is at risk to do so. So I'm going to stop sharing so that Lisa, we can go to area number 3, and that would be great. So as Lisa's bringing that up, I just wanted to name some technical difficulties that we're having in this format with getting people promoted to panelists to speak. So know that we're laying the groundwork for continued conversation and that we're planting seeds, and that our next meeting, as we will have one within the coming weeks, will be in an interactive format where folks will be seen and heard and we can have more meaningful dialogue. So thanks for your patience with the format, but hopefully you're getting great information along the way. So with respect to Action 3, Madeline, I want to thank you for so clearly defining earlier in the presentation what coordinated access networks are. Their CAN is how they're often referred to, and as you mentioned, they provide a standardized assessment and referral process for folks to be able to access community resources within a particular geographic region for people experiencing either a housing crisis or homelessness. So again, to reiterate, individuals and families call 211 from anywhere in the state to start the process. Every municipality is part of a CAN. The degree of participation and engagement is of course up to the municipality. So we see a lot of opportunity and room and growth for towns to expand their engagement. So Lisa, if you head to the next slide, these are some strategies that we'd like to step forth with respect to coordination of municipal services that can happen at all levels in the municipality. And I think there's a little delay, so we'll wait for it to be visible. There it is. So I wanted to name this at each of the possible levels of coordination. So starting with local alignment with national and state initiatives and best practices. So we spoke briefly about a housing first framework. Everything flows from that. People are much more receptive, able to and engage with the ability to benefit from services and supports if they are housed, which seems obvious and fundamental, but we just wanted to mention that, and there are many other best practices as well. Then there's regional coordination. So there's an opportunity for every municipality in Connecticut to participate in its coordinated access network and connect people with what they need. And for those smaller towns that experience challenge in addressing homelessness, this is the venue through which, in collaboration, every municipality can make a real difference. Then we wanted to name intra-municipal collaboration. So how is collaboration going within your community? There are a number of robust sessions. There's one Friday after the Hampden Town Hall, Madeline, if I'm correct, I believe it's at 3 o'clock, around policing. And there was a really compelling session yesterday on building bridges between police and social services. So, you know, to the extent that within your town, police, fire, EMS, library, and so on are all working together to provide a coordinated response to homelessness, there's a lot of successes happening in Connecticut and also untapped potential. And then finally, trainings, your local elected officials, staff members, commission members, and so on. Does everybody know what they need to know to most efficiently address homelessness? So for the third of what'll be 4 times, we're gonna head back to our Jamboard for some conversation. So for those who don't have the link open, you can access it in your chat. I'm gonna go ahead and share it again to see the great work that you're all doing. And then we'll close. And when I say we'll close, it's really just a beginning and a continuation of an ongoing conversation. So the same questions as before, we encourage you to post here. What feedback do you have on the ability to coordinate municipal systems at all levels with national best practices, regionally, within regional government, and then training? How feasible is it to do this? And what obstacles do you see? So I'll let folks post here and then also remind you while you're doing that, the next slide, which is on the Jamboard panel number 8, what success stories within municipal government can you share? What resources can help municipalities do this? So again, under the arrow, there's the sticky note. You'll click on it and you'll go ahead and you'll post. So I'll let you do that work. We're going to take a quick trip back to data and look at the great work that's happening here. So somebody did note that the CT CAN data website, ctcandata.org, provides information that's pulled from HMIS, which is the Homeless Management Information System, and can give helpful information regarding outcomes of the different programs within the CAN. And one thing I want to reiterate, so this group, we're a large number of people right now on this webinar, but a small subset of the state. And in just these few moments of posting sticky notes, the amount of information sharing and synergy and collaboration here across towns, I'm really inspired by the power of this exercise, and I'm excited to move forward and see continued learning, because again, just in this limited technological sphere and in these few minutes, the amount of peer learning that's happening is really great. So I'm gonna pop ahead again to see if there's activity happening here. I'll leave it to you to keep working on it. We're not gonna come back to the Jamboard again, but know that Lisa's gonna present on area number 4. This is here, and we're eager for your responses. So Lisa, I'm gonna turn it back over to you to present on our last area, and then we'll close with next steps.
Great, thank you, Alyssa. So our final action is to improve outcomes for people experiencing homelessness. As Alyssa mentioned, there will be a session after the Hampden Town Hall relating to this on Friday. So police encounters can range from encampment sweeps to orders to move along to tickets and arrests to staying away from certain areas that result in making it more difficult to access social services. And the longer term impacts of this can often include police mistrust or a reluctance to accept any form of services or emergency shelter. And tickets can result in fines and court fees, and non-payment can result in a warrant for arrest. And then that can then lead to a criminal record, which can prevent people from qualifying for homelessness, leading to a perverse outcome in which criminalization actually perpetuates the issue. So you criminalize people for experiencing homelessness, but then putting them in this inescapable situation where they now might face encounters with the criminal justice system on their permanent record, which could prevent them from getting housing. So, and there was actually a session yesterday at 2 p.m. on police and social worker partnerships, which is partly what our action encourages, that explored the potential of close working partnerships between law enforcement officers and social workers to engage and serve CT residents experiencing homelessness in the most effective way possible. And the session highlighted some great success stories out of Bristol and Waterbury, which were really inspiring because that collaboration really is working. So we're excited to hear inspiring stories like this that will hopefully reverberate across the state. So to encourage municipalities to improve outcomes for people experiencing homelessness, we crafted a menu of actions that encourage the review of local laws and policies to ensure civil rights protections and equity in homelessness prevention supports, and also to minimize hospitalizations and incarceration so as to address some of the issues that I just mentioned. And Alyssa, I don't know if you wanted to transition to the Jamboard now or just go to the next slide.
I think given our time, we'll go to the next slide, but thanks, Lisa.
Okay.
So in terms of next steps, Lisa, if you could just head to the next slide. And these are mirrored in the chat box. So with respect to next steps, we had the beginnings of a lot of great conversation, and I wanted to give you all multiple conduits for continuing it. So first, with respect to the Jamboard, we're going to have it up through the end of this week, and we hope that as you continue to digest what we shared and as you get inspired by other sessions, that you'll come back, visit this, and continue to add your thoughts. This is critical to us to make sure that we're ground truthing and that the roadmap that's put out is grounded in municipal reality. So particularly, please note obstacles or challenges as well as successes so that we could couple both the difficulties that municipalities are having with inspiring examples in other communities so that we could work toward leveraging the incredible power that municipalities have in addressing homelessness. So right now, I want to preface this by saying at 3 o'clock, there is a critically important, phenomenal, exciting ATI session happening with respect to the role of non-human animals and being a barrier or not to homelessness. That being said, if we were in a room, I would hope that for 5 minutes after the session, you might come up and chat with the presenters so that we could figure out next steps. So we have a different Zoom room that we're going to be opening, different than this one, where we'll all be face-to-face. We'll all be able to see each other, talk to each other. So if you cut and paste that link somewhere else, leave this Zoom room and then are willing to hop on for 5 minutes, we'll coordinate and have some conversation around how we keep the momentum going, how we continue to create and refine the roadmap in a way that honors your ability to continue participating in the ATI. So we'll keep it really brief and then have a more robust face-to-face conversation too. The working group, some of you who were on might be on it, but there was a working group that was working under the auspices of CCM's Task Force on Homelessness Prevention. If you're not already on it, there are continued opportunities to shape these actions, and we need you and we need your expertise. So please either email me, or if you go to the Jamboard, there's a slide. You could just put a sticky note up with your name and your email address, and we'll contact you as well as the folks who participated back in February to continue the conversation and take this work across the finish line. And I'll just end by saying that if you have any other input, you can email actioninput@sustainablecT.org. So Lisa, if you stop sharing, I believe Madeline has some concluding remarks and we'll send you on your way. And thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. This was really wonderful, and we're so happy to have so many of you gathered today, and hope that some of you can join for the next few minutes afterwards, but also we'll be sending out information about a follow-up gathering because we really want to continue the momentum face-to-face, which we realize is a different format than today permitted. I do want to make sure that you all know about some upcoming sessions that may be of interest to many of you tomorrow, and that I hope you're checking out the schedule and sharing it around. But there is a McKinney-Vento training that is about the homeless students' Bill of Rights tomorrow from 1 to 3, hosted by the State Department of Education, which should be really interesting. There's a session on shelter diversion, which is a practice that you can use if you're working with clients to help them stay housed rather than enter shelter. That training is on Thursday morning. We hope that you'll encourage your mayors and first selectmen to join us on Thursday at 2 o'clock for the follow-up to this, focused on what mayors and first selectmen can do to support efforts to end homelessness as part of the Mayor's Homelessness Prevention Task Force. And then Friday, as Alyssa noted, there is an outreach session in the morning, as well as a session about alternative approaches for policing at 3 o'clock. There's also the Hamden Virtual Town Hall, which I know Alyssa mentioned, which is going to be a really great model that you can replicate in your town, and we would be thrilled to work with you to replicate in your town. We're looking at the week of homelessness, of National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week in November, to look at doing that with towns. So please be in touch. So with that, I want to thank all of you for attending. I want to thank all of our fabulous presenters. Jen, thanks for kicking us off. Brian, thank you. Alyssa and Lisa, thank you. And thanks to all of you out there for your interest in working together to end homelessness. It's so important, and we are very grateful to all of you. Take care.
Thank you.